Good evening and welcome to the Blaze Radio Arizona Senate General Debate After Hours Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bradshaw, along with Patrick Apap, Mia Osmonbekov, Spencer West, and Larisa May, all on hand for this general debate. And this was a good one tonight. This was between Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democratic senator, as well as Blake Masters, who's running as a Republican, and Mark Victor, who is running as a Libertarian. Now, topics that were discussed in this debate were inflation, immigration, abortion, voting by mail, kind of military. They talked about military a little bit, as well as water rights, the drought in Arizona, and then they closed off with some closing statements. This debate was monitored by Ted Simons, who works for PBS, and this was broadcast live for Arizona. So, initial debate reactions. This is a very broad sort of just initial debate reactions, but I would say it was interesting how Kelly and Masters were kind of at each other's throats all night. Like, a lot of it was, that's a lie. I didn't say that. No, you said that. You know, that kind of thing. And it's just a lot of like back and forth of almost a childish way to like argue in a way of saying like you did this and you did that and that was horrible and that was a bad like policy or whatever. And it felt like sometimes they didn't get a lot of their actual thought processes and policies across. Now, do you guys feel the same way?
At the same time, it's sort of just like the way that these political debates tend to go. So it's not like it was surprising. Like even in like the 2016 presidential debates, like they're very much, oh, my opponent is wrong, my opponent is childish, all sorts of other words that I can't say on here. But so it's like I feel like it's just reflective of just a larger trend. So it's not. I mean, it's bad, but it's not like a surprise.
I mean, Blake Masters was literally like avoiding saying bad words. He said "gosh darn." He was trying his best not to get angry at what Mark Kelly was saying. So you could just see like the anger and the distraught that he felt when Mark Kelly said basically anything against him.
I think the greatest problem I had with it, and where I do agree with you, is that they've created a competition between them, and politics is a competition, but the competition shouldn't be between each candidate. It should be who serves the people the best, and I think when it comes to how they're competing, they lose a lot of their civility when they start name-calling each other, when they start interrupting one another, when we saw Blake Masters interrupt a lot of what Mark Kelly was saying with stuff like "that's a lie" and such, and when Mark Kelly would take control of the debate more in the sense of a moderator role, when he'd look at Masters, point at him, and say, "You'll get your turn." It kind of felt at parts where the moderator lost control, and I think we're seeing that more and more often in the last couple of years, of the moderator just kind of being there, but not moderating. Like, they just exist, but they're not really telling everybody, like, you need to remain civil, you need to remain in turn so that we have a proper, fair debate.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat. It felt like more of like a performance rather than like a debate about policy. Like you were saying, like with Mark Kelly, making the dramatic things. And I'm wondering if it's like to appeal to the audience more, so that like I say like media outlets have like catchier titles, like, oh, Mark Kelly does this, like, or like with like Fox News, like Blake Masters owns Kelly, like
a commercial.
I wonder if it's for their respective like hardcore like supporter base rather than for appealing to like say voters who are like on the fence about
it. Really does feel like that, a lot more posturing than actual honest, and using the term with politicians honest loosely, than a lot more honest conversations, open conversations about what should be going on, and more of just, here's what's wrong with my opponent, and here's why you shouldn't vote for them, but not why should you vote for me.
Debates that really didn't go a long way, I would say, in that regard. But I think, too, like, they walked in, they were all amiable, they all greeted each other, all said hi to each other, some of them even cracked jokes, like, Mark Victor was cracking jokes just to the journalists that were there, and all of a sudden in the debate, it's like, hold on, they flipped a switch, it's a whole new person. And so, like, you're right, the debates are kind of set up for that to happen, just being nationally televised, or I guess, in this case, statewide televised, but, like, they're set up for that to happen, but it's like you really see the kind of like true power of these people, because they are saying these things that like some of them, a lot of things they're saying, like I don't even think they have backing or like true evidence, but they just said these things and they just kind of fling them out here, and it's like, what is the audience supposed to do with that?
Yeah, to the point on true evidence and like seeing that a lot of what they said might not have been true at all. I think when it came to like the back and forth between Kelly and Masters, mostly on their immigration policy, when Masters would say, "Oh, Kelly voted against adding more Border Patrol agents, but wanted to add more IRS agents," and Kelly wouldn't like explicitly deny that, more explicitly deny why Masters was saying Kelly was doing that, when there's a simple fix if that's true or not. And it felt more performative than anything, because you could say, "Hey, I did this for this reason," and not, "Oh, Masters is saying I'm doing this for the wrong reason." Like, speak for yourself and don't speak so much as to what people are saying wrong to you, because you're going to get people that are downplaying you all the time, especially in a political leadership role, but they're not advocating for themselves enough at some point. They're more advocating for word against them.
Which is once I think Ted Simons did do right in this regard. Like, he talked about the 2020 election, and he had to kind of like corner Blake Masters, for lack of a better word, and kind of corner him and say like, "Hey, do you think the election was stolen?" And, you know, Blake at first was kind of like trying to skirt the topic and not really talk about it, but then he eventually, like, Ted Simons like forced him to talk about it. So I do like how Simons did that, at least, but no, you're right. It's a lot of just like hearsay. He said, she said, and it was interesting. It was like not a lot was getting talked about during some of these debates.
I mean, like one of the parts that I really disliked about it was their repetitive answers. I mean, politicians, they have a certain amount of things that they want to say, and they're going to say them as many times as they can. Mark Kelly kept talking about privatizing Social Security. He kept talking about how Blake Masters wants a total ban on abortion. And no matter what Masters said, whether he kept denying it or not, he just kept repeating that point over and over and over again. Like, what does that actually achieve? He's denying it. You're saying he's doing it. What's the truth there?
And when you talk about the time taken of that, like, there are a lot of topics that didn't get covered. And Mark Victor talked about this post-debate. He talked about how there wasn't conversation of education, gun control, a lot of topics that like really do matter to the state and are huge issues, but just couldn't even get discussed because of some of this like bickering and fighting that was presented on stage.
I mean, yeah, like the school voucher expansion things like a couple of weeks ago. Then there's like a shooting at U of A yesterday. Like, they're very relevant to Arizona issues. And they had like no time for water either. And the water is like, you know, life. It's like, it's important.
It's very important.
Very Arizona issue, and a lot
especially
of
the water cuts.
Let's talk about this Mark Victor, though, and how he kind of handled himself, because he's the third-party libertarian, and obviously, you know, Democrat, Republican, they get the most, I guess, clout, if you will, for lack of a better word, and especially in these kind of debates. But typically it's only just a debate between a Democrat and a Republican. Usually we don't even have a Libertarian Party in these debates. But when I like heard him, I was surprised by how well he handled himself, because he clearly got less time up on the podium. He clearly got less time to speak because because Kelly and Masters were doing this back and forth. Victor clearly got less time, and so I thought that with the time that he had, like he seemed to like make the most of it and get his points across at least. Do you guys feel the same way?
I mean, I assume he expected to speak less. I mean, he's a third-party candidate. He knows that it's really between Masters and Kelly. So the expectation, I hope in his mind, is that I have very few chances to speak, so I need to get out what I need to say as fast as I can, basically. But as for what he actually did get out, I would say that he said what he wanted to say, and he kind of got his point across to voters who don't really want to vote for Republicans or Democrats. He got his voice out to those middling people who might want a third-party candidate.
Yeah, he had a very like unifying theme across his arguments. He said like, he was like, first of all, blaming both parties for, you know, Arizona problems, and he was saying like, you know, like, I think he just really appealed, like Spencer was saying, to the base of voters who just sort of don't really want to go for either side, but they also know they can't be apathetic in this election. So I think he really like touched on base with those concerns.
I think the only thing he left out that I think he really should have included, what he included in our little talk after the debate, was a concept of ranked choice voting, because he can advocate against the two-party system all he wants, saying that both parties are causing problems regardless of what they are or what they're trying to do, but you need to also provide a solution, or at least make sure people hearing that solution on how to try and make that better. And if that's advocating for ranked choice voting, which was what he was saying afterwards, then mention that, because that is a good thing that can help go against policies where it's like you can't get on the ballot in a federal election if you don't get 5% of the total vote. That's true. That's one of the major deterrents of third parties getting onto ballots. And he said that he's like the only one who's gone onto the ballot for like a senator race in Arizona since 2012 when he was there. And now he's back. So he's winning somewhere, but he's not saying the big words, in my opinion. It's got to be something that people can tangibly understand, because his major points were live and let live. And while I understand that he only has so much time, he doesn't have a lot of time to like really get all he wants to say in there. So he's got to have that one thing, that one tagline to be memorable. So he made it his tagline. Great. It's so broad. Really, live and let live can mean so many things. It can apply to every policy in a completely different way. You hear live and let live, and that could mean completely different things. For example, abortion. And now you're making your own decisions in your head. Oh, what does this mean? How does this apply? Will I vote for them? He needs to control that narrative, and I think he should be doing it in a better tagline or single issue that's easy enough to understand. So I feel like he mentions it after the debate. Why not mentioning it during the debate? At least throw it in. If he knows he's already at a disadvantage and can't talk as much as the others, talk about what he wants.
Especially since a lot of people see voting for a third party as throwing away a vote, applying these principles, like you said, would really help him in the long run. But what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that it would have like distinguished him amongst the two, because like if he was talking about like a concrete policy thing, like in stating like ranked choice voting, while like Blake Masters and Kelly, although they sort of reference their policy ideas, is more like just like trying to poke holes in their respective opponents' like policy, or in the case of Masters, he's criticizing Kelly's like run in the Senate, while Kelly's just criticizing Masters' ideas. But yeah, he would have like distinguished himself, who's talked about ranked choice voting, because that would be like a concrete policy thing that he could run on, rather than just like a very broad statement.
You talk about distinguishing yourself. I do think, in one regard, this was a very libertarian thing he did. Of every single argument, he said, I don't want to be Democrat or Republican. I don't like what they're doing either way, but I'm going to do what I'm doing. That is a very like traditionally libertarian. I know libertarian is kind of a newer party, but traditionally very libertarian thing to say of like, oh no, it's not one or the other. It is just us. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, it was very libertarian.
Totally agree. I think the only extension to that thought I see is that it's very libertarian, but it's probably very independent or very non-registered. Because the major reason you'd register for a party in most states is to vote for their election because you agree with their views. And yet, I think it's 40% of all registered voters are no party or independent. Are they saying that for a certain reason if they don't want to vote for either, or they don't agree with all of them in certain ways? Maybe we're seeing that idea that it's really tagged along to the Libertarian Party expanded to more people, that 40% and so on, that are non-registered for either party. Because, I mean, technically, neither party holds a plurality in registered voters. It's the independents that do.
Absolutely.
Arizona's actually 1/3 independent voters. So, I mean, a candidate like that is extremely important in the election that we're having right now.
Which, like, it brings me to a question. Do you guys think that that Victor tonight, like, reached out to independent voters? Like, do you think he, like, got that vote?
Okay. I'm just going to state it out, right? He's not going to win. And it's not for a lack of what he did or how much he actually helped himself in this debate. He is not Republican. He is not Democrat. He is not going to win. It is a two-party system. No matter what you do, you're not going to win the debate. It's just not going to happen.
Regardless of if this state is Republican or a swing, as I think we're seeing it develop in this last couple of years, it's a traditional state. I think this state's very rooted in its traditionalism, whether it be of its state identity or laws it passes or its allegiance to well-loved politicians like John McCain. They have a tradition, and that this completely breaks that tradition. So I don't see him winning Arizona, but I feel like for Arizona he should.
I think he just might bring more attention to just libertarian ideology. Given that the things he was saying while he had his brief amount of airtime, they were things that would probably resonate with a lot of people who are frustrated with the very polarized political climate. So at the very least, I think he managed to get that across. And obviously that's not going to translate into a Senate win, but that might be important for future libertarian candidates running maybe the next decade.
That's one of the things that he did say to us when we spoke with him after the debate, is that he knows that he doesn't have a high chance of winning in a state like Arizona especially, but he was saying how he wants to get his ideology of live and let live out there. He wants people to be more aware of like the issues that he's supporting, not necessarily in it to win it, but in it to spread awareness. I guess.
Just even spreading awareness that there's like a third option. You don't have to necessarily compromise
Yeah.
by being like Republican or Democrat. You could find like some kind of common sense ground between them.
I will say though, in connecting both ranked choice voting and the libertarians' unlikeliness of winning, really maybe it's more about their impact. I'm going to reference the Georgia 2020 Senate election because the biggest reason that Georgia has 2 Democratic senators right now, which seems like an anomaly, is because one of their because they use ranked choice voting for their elections, because one of them was a special election that had like 20 people running, so they had to pick the top 2. The other reason is because in the other Senate election there were 3 people running, and the Libertarian got 2.5% of the vote, and neither Democrat nor Republican got more than 50%. Georgia has a law that states that if you don't get a majority and you get a plurality, the last one is dropped and you have a new election. That means that the Libertarian had such an impact on that election that they caused a second one because no one got a majority. If we start seeing large impact like that there, then maybe here, maybe one day it progresses to the point where a Libertarian wins.
Perhaps not in Arizona because we don't have that ranked choice voting system, which is, to Victor's point, which could be like a very flawed kind of system, especially in the future years. But I think also in regards to like how he like carried himself during the speech, a lot of what he was saying of that, I'm not Democrat, I'm not Republican, kind of clouded what he was saying. Like at least during his discussion of economics, I felt like lost in the mud during his speech because he was like saying these things of like, I don't want to like cut tax rates, but I just want like lower ones and stuff like that. And sometimes I was like, where do you stand on this? Like, where exactly do you stand? And he says, I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat, but where do you stand?
Yeah, absolutely. Because right now the Libertarians exist in a paradoxical mindset. Only, in my opinion, mostly because they exist in like a lot of Libertarians are taglined with like the cares about social issues, but also like wants lower taxes and such or something like that. Like they think fiscally conservative, but they think liberally social, and that's a contradiction to our own 2-party system. And I think that's the problem, is it's a contradiction to a 2-party system that makes it say that, hey, you could want to be fiscally conservative but socially liberal, and that's a problem because it's paradoxical. But that's just an opinion, and anyone's welcome to their own opinion. However, we're totally telling this one party, like, you're not going the full way here or the full way that way, conservative or liberal. Now they're in a paradox. Now they're in an identity crisis. It's also a problem with the Libertarian Party in a whole because they're in an identity crisis on which way to go more, the conservative route or the liberal route. And you get someone like Mark Victor, whose live and let live seems so neutral, you create another dimension to the paradox.
And sometimes I can just cloud like even viewers' judgment.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the 3-party system for like hours, I'm assuming. But let's go back into Blake Masters specifically. He said a lot of things that could definitely be taken as upsetting. One thing I heard was he referred to immigrants as illegal aliens.
And illegals.
And just illegals. Yeah. Where do you guys... I know
Masters' terminology, or maybe the Republican terminology, doesn't seem so helpful for the sake of the debate because it seems a little dehumanizing. And
absolutely.
A little dehumanizing.
Little to say the least.
An understatement. And if you want to appeal to the human and appeal to what they want, you don't dehumanize them. Simple as that. Regardless of who you're for and regardless of where I agree and where I disagree, you can't dehumanize people you're trying to get their vote for. Doesn't work like that.
And he was trying to like oversimplify the issues, like, there's open borders and drug cartels are going through, like ignoring the fact that like
very generalized.
Like most immigrants are just, regular people escaping violence. And that's not even like a political thing, that's like literally like if you look at the data of immigrants, like their socioeconomic status.
Well, and like he brought up the issue of like the wall, but I feel like this issue's been I don't want to say dead, but it's been like, Biden stopped the wall for 2 years now and he's like, let's just like finish it up. Like I don't know if politics it's not going to just work like that,
He kept like over like dramatizing it. Like it was sort of it felt like kind of comical in a way because like that anyone like any reasonable person would know it's not like a war zone at the border, like the way he was describing it.
I would actually like to argue the other side of what you said, which is using rhetoric that is very aggressive, very almost non-PC, is kind of appealing to a lot of voters. I mean, that's kind of what Trump ran on when he was running in 2016, and that's what he won on. Masters is endorsed by Trump. He is going to get almost exclusively all the Trump voters. And the expectation that he's going to get more liberal people is just not going to happen. So using rhetoric like illegal aliens or just illegals, I don't think it's going to hurt him very much at all. It might push people who are iffy on him, that are maybe more right-leaning, towards him, because he uses rhetoric that is non-PC. He doesn't care what everyone else thinks. He doesn't care what liberals say. He's going to say what he has on his mind, and he's going to use the rhetoric that he wants, which I think will appeal to
We
them.
see that too in his one little mention to wokeness when talking about the military, because it seems like just this one randomly thrown in thing, and yet it appeals to that specific demographic that he appears to be targeting.
It's like comfort food to them, someone who calls out the illegals and the wokeness. It's like reassuring.
I stand with
to
that
them.
person. Yeah.
I totally agree that those large, loaded, not radical, but words that really catch are something huge for voters to pull into. I totally agree. I think the problem is when they use it, or at least when you refer to Trump's used it and Trump won, Trump then lost. Trump then went into a large social and political scheme, but perspective against him for his actions in presidency, and he did lose this state. While I don't think this state is blue all of a sudden, I do think this state is anti-Trump mostly because he was anti-McCain. So maybe they're not anti-Trump, but they're anti-McCain, because they have Arizona voters have such loyalties to who they believe were so good, John McCain, that someone endorsed by Trump might have a worse case if they're endorsed by Trump because of that hatred, because of that anti-ness towards someone they're loyal to and love. And the biggest problem I see with saying that it'll appeal to those moderates that are more right is that, how to word this, is that the election's pretty close last I checked. It's a couple percentage points away. So even then, while you're pushing some of the moderate rights or pulling some to you, you're pushing the moderate lefts away, or even the moderate middles. Because
would the moderate lefts even consider voting for Masters?
In this state, if the election between Trump and Biden was within 0.3% to Biden, we're in a swing, my opinion.
Yeah.
And so even if it's just anti-McCainness, it's also the fact that people are realizing, hey, I didn't like this. I'm going to vote the other way, even if I don't like a lot of what they said in a usual sense. So I think we see a problem. We're going for only one side of the moderacy, just as another way of saying I'm going for one side of politics.
Yeah, on a more cynical note, Blake Masters' use of this inflammatory rhetoric like illegals is actually a very effective fear-mongering tool.
Oh, for sure.
No matter what side of the political aisle you're on, we like to flatter ourselves that we're empathetic and compassionate beings who can understand nuance. But especially this time, with skyrocketing inflation and just growing mistrust and fear, someone labeling or I guess having scapegoating a problem can, we've seen it historically, it works out pretty well. So honestly, I'm concerned that this tactic is actually just really effective, and that we might paradoxically help him.
Do you
to
feel
be
as
more
though it's
radical.
effective in the short term and long term, or only one? Because my opinion is that this does not work in the long term, only because of what we've seen against
But I think
Trump
it might
in the long
work
term
for the
after his
election
presidency.
itself.
Sure, it could work for the election, and then in 2 years
For this specific
for
election.
this specific election, and then the Senate seat goes back up for grabs. And maybe more is revealed that's the same way Trump was. It's we can't do this again.
But speaking of his rhetoric that he used, the thing with fentanyl was very effective.
Yeah.
Mentioning the
Children.
death of children.
Children, yeah.
It just goes right into that part of your brain that is so sympathetic.
Now, loaded language like death of children, I totally understand, because that's something that's impactful and has some basis of I'm not trying to dehumanize something where it's death of children.
Right.
That's a real problem.
Right.
I understand. When you call someone an illegal alien, you're literally dehumanizing
But
them.
who did he blame for the fentanyl coming into America? Illegal
aliens.
Right.
So,
But I
Easy to
think
blame.
that people need to become a little more. They need to acknowledge a little more the difference in that. You can fall for the pathological, the pathos logic in children dying. I see that happening because children are dying. That's terrible. The children are the future. We gotta protect them. But if you're falling for the illegal aliens portion, it kind of feels more like what Masters is calling against Kelly in his term as senator, of just going for what the party does, because the party just says illegal aliens. It's not like everybody calls them illegal aliens. It's kind of just their thing. And when they keep doing that, they fearmonger, and that fearmongering creates, to me, short-term success and possibly long-term implications that ruin their party further.
And to your point, though, Spence, especially here in Arizona, the fentanyl problem has been like huge lately, like
Fair.
very prevalent. What was it, like 80 million pounds found in that guy's home like a month ago or whatever that was? Mm-hmm. Huge problem right now. But Blake Masters, like, he did a great, like, to his, like, I gotta give him credit for it. Like, that was a great tactic to go into fentanyl, like, because it is a problem, and like, it's one of those universal things. Like, most people can agree they don't want people dying because of drugs. Whether or not you agree with the drugs being here or not is a different issue, but you don't want people dying from drugs. That's something universally, and like, so he used that to his advantage. And what I thought that Kelly didn't do as well is he just kind of like brushed over it. Like, but I remember from Kelly did not even really talk about fentanyl.
Yeah, Kelly let Masters dictate and lead on all the issues while he was like reacting to what Blake Masters was saying. Like, in a way, he just was kind of, I don't think he pushed back enough or like reframed the argument around something else.
Or just see Masters, whatever Kelly said, like Masters like immediately like boom, pushing back, whatever he said.
Like he gave him like no room to
I think
to
the
breathe.
most Kelly talked about when it came to drugs going through our into our side of the border was when he was talking about his investment into tech on the border that could perform x-rays in our checkpoints for stuff like that. But it was a one-off. It definitely didn't feel like a major focus. And if his major focus on immigration was less boots but more money into technology, he should have focused on that more. Because he did concede the point that the fentanyl problem on the border is a crisis and it needs to be solved, but then didn't connect the two. Like, I feel like if he created a verbal connection between I'm investing money into our border security in a technological sense so that we stop further fentanyl from getting into this country and killing children. Yeah. Bam. He has more control over that debate.
Which is one place that Victor, like, absolutely also kind of took advantage on. He was like, no, I want to put immigrants to work. Like, I want to help our economy, the Arizona economy, by getting immigrants here into the state. Like, it's fine if we let them in, but also, like, they should be working, though. Victor, like, that appeals to a lot of audiences, especially because, like, the economy is in the state that it is right now. So, like, Victor used that to advantage, and he like kind of took control in that way.
That might have been his strongest point on immigration. Like, out of every topic, I think he got the most word in, and the most word that's a lot more like universal than what either the other two candidates were saying on like this country being a country of immigrants and we need a younger workforce because we have a worker crisis. It definitely felt a little more like applicable in a general sense, like as though someone a Democrat or Republican said it, as though we should be listening to him a little bit about it.
And he definitely, and I feel like he just did do a very good job of immigration. I didn't think that he would ever, because he doesn't have much on his website about immigration, which is kind of surprising. So the fact that he was able to go in there and speak on those things, like in the manner that he did, was sort of impressive for, at least someone who's like a third party and, like Spencer said, will probably not be elected. I did put a lot of respect for him on that. Let's talk about this. I mean, the abortion talk. Man, it was. It turned into, was it a wolf fest? I don't know, for lack of a better word.
I was surprised that Blake Masters even admitted that he, like, supports the 15-week abortion.
I don't think he does. I think he's saying that because that is the most moderate thing that you can say.
But I mean, maybe my bar is, like, very low right now, but I totally thought he completely dodged. Like, wouldn't even, like, talk about...
You can't completely dodge when you're on live TV. It's impossible.
Abe Hamaday completely dodged.
I know you have a lot of comments about this thing, so...
I do. What shocked me was with Victor, his extreme localization of like abortion legislation, like leaving it up to counties, which create so many issues.
He didn't even say counties though. He said like cities. He said Scottsdale, Mesa, not even like Pinal County, not even like not Maricopa, no.
Municipalities,
Scottsdale. What is Scottsdale? What are they going to tell you about abortion rights?
Let me just drive to, like, let's say you're in Fountain Hills, okay, and they ban abortion. What are they going to do? Stop you from taking a day trip up to Scottsdale? Like...
Well, I mean, that does solve the problem that when you create zones of abortions being outlawed in certain states, when you have to go all the way thousands of miles to another to try and get an abortion, if you localize it further, you have a better shot at affording going somewhere to get an abortion. So in that sense, I kind of see where he's coming from.
But the legality will get so clouded so fast.
Absolutely.
If you're if the city's maybe 5 miles away, what are the abortion providers? If you're 5 miles here, you're not.
where is it? Yeah.
I lived on the border of Santan Valley and Queen Creek. If Santan Valley bans it, and I take a 2-minute drive to Queen Creek. Can they sue me for that? Can they arrest me for that? What can they do? What can they do to stop me from getting an abortion office?
We don't even know that on the state level. I think that argument could also be made on the state legalization too, because states are making the point that if you leave to go to another state, you will get criminally charged for it, and so. Sure, that's a problem, absolutely, but that's not just on a municipality's sake. I think that problem still exists if you're going to leave it to the states, and if we're going to talk about leaving it to the smaller and smaller jurisdictions, and we haven't gotten to the leave it to the individual yet. That's the next one over the municipality. And if you leave it to the individual, you leave it to the individual's choice, which is essentially just pro-choice. You just have it be who you want, what you want to do, regardless of someone larger than you and larger than just one person's opinion, saying. And I don't think any of them made that point. And I think that's a large problem with the debates is you can say, hey, if it's a jurisdictions issue, let's do this. If it's a personal issue on religion, then we're going to say no more abortion. But then no one's talking about the individuality of it or the individuality of privacy or contract to a doctor or even a compelling interest. If a state says, I want to make this law and they're appealed, they have to prove in the Supreme Court through many precedent that they have compelling interest to keep this law in place. Many states' compelling interest is the right to life to the fetus, which right now legally, from what I've gathered, is not proven and is not debated by any of these people. And maybe that's to the point of what Mark's saying. They're not talking about the right thing.
And apart from that concept, one thing that Masters did do, which honestly shocked me and sort of angered me, I guess, was that he said, quote, we're going to fall into this in America. He was like, these extreme abortion policies are the ones that only China and North Korea follow. Bringing in overseas countries for absolutely no reason. He's definitely referring to communism there, though. Just felt like such an attack for literally no reason out of nowhere.
I think it's actually a good rhetorical choice that he's tapping again into the fear mongering first base. But
I just think it's irrelevant because we already know that abortions happening during or after the third trimester happen 1% of the time. And there's over 600,000 abortions in 1 year, or maybe it was 800,000 abortions in the most recent year. 1% happen in that circumstance. That's not even an impactful situation that you're gathering for, unless you're saying it's one life doesn't matter, that's an impact. But they're not making that point. They're just saying they want to make this general thing a law because that's what they want.
What got me, I'm sorry, back to the North Korea-China thing, is it kind of implied that women have more rights over their bodies in China and North Korea than they do here in America. So I kind of sat there and was wait a minute.
But also, too, for me personally, I was we were in Arizona. This is it's not even a national debate. This is just Arizona specifically. Why are you bringing other countries into this? Which is, it felt really unnecessary.
Well, you bring North Korea and China in because those
fear-mongering.
are absolute enemies. What he's saying is, if our enemies have this policy, why should we? That's what he's saying. And your thought process when you hear that is, yeah, why? Why are we having the same exact policies as China and North Korea? Why would we do that? That's what he was attempting to do by saying something like that.
And I think Kelly just really fumbled with the abortion question because he's saying I support all the restrictions under Roe without
he didn't even specify.
No, exactly, without honing in the point that he is for quote unquote late term abortions because the medical reasons. Sometimes you can't deliver the kid because it's dead or something. But he didn't drill that in. He was just I vaguely
He also said, I think 3 separate times, on 3 separate occasions, just said that Masters said that abortion was demonic, which, fear-mongering, but he repeated it 4 times.
He needs to connect that point. If he's going to make a connection to Masters' debate that it's demonic or it's a religious issue for them, further connect that point to the fact that these politicians shouldn't be using their own religious views in policy making.
Oh, yeah.
We know that for a fact. But Kelly kind of shorted himself on that by not making that connection. If he makes that connection, he has a stronger case against Masters.
Absolutely. Which is what Victor did, because Victor was oh, Masters is using this as an evasive tactic right now. And he was able to promote his own kind of brand in that way.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing Kelly really did was saying, oh, well, it should be up to women and their doctors. But that doesn't counter any of Blake's arguments that he
No.
made. And
Correct. Yeah.
one point I especially loved isn't the right term to use here. One point that kind of hit me
Resonated with you, yeah.
resonated with me. When Masters was talking about this, and he went into the fear mongering again when he was talking about the very late term abortions, and he was like, "Yeah, are we gonna like let them continue to dismember babies?" And I was like, there are going to be people out there who are eating that argument up.
Constitutionally
I can
or
think of a few
scientifically
right now,
or
like-
legally define it as a baby and then make that point. But they really don't have that right now to anything I've
Exactly.
read.
Yeah, although it was like kind of inaccurate, I think Masters is a good way of like actually linking his arguments to like impacts in this case,
True,
dismembered
yes.
babies. Like
Yeah.
Kelly could have definitely like extended.
That's where his arguments
the same
fell
way.
so short. And there are so many points that he could have made to this topic and to all of the others where he just didn't. He just
didn't
held
lean into
back and he's like,
pathos.
actually, here's what you've been saying. So, and it doesn't help him.
Even with the social security question, you could have just like painted like a really sad picture, like, oh, think of, like your old retired parents and some like Wall Street tycoon sucking out their life savings. Like he could have really went in on that.
That imagery would have hit like a lot of people, right in their hearts.
My,
And that's the,
my,
You
mom,
missed.
my mom said this to me like 2 weeks ago. Basically, people have been saying this forever. Next time they're gonna throw grandma off the cliff. So that's what Masters and that's what Kelly was basically saying. Masters is trying to do with privatizing Social Security, which interesting rhetoric, I'd say.
Really, yeah, and also really went over on that point. The last thing I want to touch on is this. They talked about the military for a little bit, but this military pronoun thing. This came out of left field. To say the least.
Yeah.
That was out of the park. That wasn't even it.
It wasn't even it at all. God, just basically to recap, Pat, do you want to give us a
For
little...
some reason, Blake Masters has an issue with the military being quote-unquote woke and forcing military members to use pronouns. Now, for some reason, I don't know how the Republican Party got here, or maybe just the conservative mindset, that pronouns are a liberal tool. That there's something to use against conservative mindset, and not just a general part of the English language. Like,
It was referred to as wokeness.
Yeah.
yes.
So next time you hear
Yes.
someone say woke, just remember Blake Masters is kind of looking down on you. Like, maybe you shouldn't say that.
For some reason they created like a synonym between pronouns and wokeness when we use pronouns in our daily lives and learn them in kindergarten to form a cohesive sentence. Like I don't know when this popped
Where the
up.
connection with...
But also, since when does like using someone's proper pronouns like affect the efficiency, the lethality of the military, as Masters point out? Like,
oh no, I have to take the time to say there instead of he. Like, what?
then I'm dead. That's it. The military crumbles. It's over.
No, it's like using pronouns and being respectful as this sensitive thing that's destroying our military.
But that sounds like
If
a conservative
anything-
value being like
No,
respectful.
exactly. If
or
anything,
whatever.
being respectful to those you're working with, especially in a military setting, creates further camaraderie where you need camaraderie the most.
Exactly.
On the battlefield.
I don't know what he expects. Like the issue is gonna be. Is someone gonna like have a sniper on like a terrorist? And they're gonna be like, "Sir, ma'am,
Yeah, I don't know
like
where
what
the
do you
problem is.
expect to happen? There's not gonna be an issue
Yeah.
with pronouns."
They seem to be making a problem out of nothing. Like they try to talk to an invisible social problem as though it exists. More, they just want to create a point
When
into
it
something.
really
not.
doesn't.
It
And he
really
he
doesn't.
literally just shot himself in the foot. Because up to that point, he wasn't like doing terrible, at least in the hair. But like he brought this up, and he was like, he literally said that some of those dumb quotes. I know will be in the newspaper by tomorrow of things like, "The military is not a place for political correctness." What?
Right, but then here's the thing that begs the question, does this tie in with what he said before about illegal aliens, tying to that voter base who's very, I don't want to be politically correct, here's someone who stands with me in this. How he's alienating himself to certain voters, moderate lefts especially, but to further right-wing voters, he's kind of, I wouldn't say helping himself, but
But he seems to be framing
Yes.
political correctness as like this topic of like, well, like you're either politically correct or you're not, and it's like almost better just to be like unwoke and not politically correct than to actually be politically correct, which is
That's
just
why it's a culture war.
I think the military.
exactly.
The military thing was just like an excuse for him to like throw out that wokeness thing, because like this vague fear of wokeness is like a common theme among, I guess, like conservative voters. So I think that's just his excuse. Just throw it in. He doesn't care if it makes sense or not. Just get in the buzzword.
And obviously he's not politically correct by, many accounts tonight, but that would it really like hit differently. I was like, what is he talking about here?
Can I actually ask a question before we end everything off?
Yes, absolutely.
How do you guys think this debate impacted their chances of winning the Senate seat?
I think Kelly got hurt tonight.
Yeah.
I really do. I think he started off like we saw him, good attitude, good mindset, and all of a sudden the second the Masters started talking, like Kelly was just in like defensive, kind of like turtle shell mode, where he's like,
even if he sees
I'm
like
not sure
eyes and
much
like the way his like
Yeah,
fingers,
his
he was
thumb was, like,
he was
tapping the whole
seething.
time.
Yeah, seething.
I completely agree. I think Masters not only knew exactly what to say at the right times, but Kelly had absolutely no rebuttal to almost anything Masters said. He just kept repeating what he wanted to say without making any comment about what Masters was saying, and that's just gonna make him seem really, really weak to the average voter in Arizona.
Masters just sounded sharper by comparison. Also, just managed to dig under Kelly's skin, like he was playing a psychological game.
Kelly played a little too much into his precedent, in my opinion, and I think that will affect him the most. While I think in the last political polls that showed that he was winning by like a few percent, nothing crazy, but definitely not like 0.5. I think this becomes closer, but Kelly still has a slight lead.
I think he does still have the slight lead, but I think it definitely hurt because like people who are like just an average citizen, they're gonna see this and they're gonna say, hey, we do have a drug problem. Immigration's a big topic right now. Like economy's where it is, water is where it is, and they're gonna look at Masters and gonna say, well, he was like strong on those points.
Mark Kelly didn't comment about it at all.
Right.
Blake Masters did.
I think what is saving Kelly a little bit is his abortion arguments, whereas Masters has whatever opinion he has on it.
Yeah.
Let's see what his website says tomorrow.
The same
Right
way,
now.
Right now.
The same way that Kansas, a truly red state, voted against a constitutional amendment to abortion restrictions, somehow couldn't really tell you how that happened. We could see a similar thing happening in Arizona, where this might be the issue, and people are going to vote based off of that issue.
And if you already voted Democrat, you're absolutely after tonight going to vote Democrat again, most likely, if you're at all, if you stand with like Biden and those kind of like leaders, because you see this like Blake Masters' introduction was like fiery. It was like very indictful. So like if you're like the average like Democrat or something, like you're gonna look at that and be like, nah, I'm still gonna vote blue. But
I wonder if Blake Masters might have an advantage because of his youth, because he just manages to sound more like cogent, put together. Well, at least in this
He also
debate.
looks very well
Yeah,
put together.
he looks. He somehow looks more like vibrant and vivacious, and like Kelly. I don't know. He just seemed like.
Kelly looked drained.
Yeah, he's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he looked drained. He looked like. I don't want to say he looked old.
he looks
like,
he kind of looked like shocked by like how well Blake Masters was doing. He was like.
Yeah.
He was up
It's
there
just
and
like
he was
the obvious contrast in like their ages and like the way they speak.
And
I
their
wonder if
height
that's-
too.
The height. Yeah, like all those
difference.
little psychological factors. I wonder if that could have a big sway.
For
on voters.
context, at the beginning, Mark Victor walked on, and Mark Victor's probably 5'3", and Blake Masters is probably over 6 foot. And Mark made a comment to Blake saying, "I hope this isn't a competition on height." And then Blake said, "I hope it is." So that's where we get that.
Just seems
To his credit, that was funny.
Had me giggling a bit.
It was funny.
That was about the only thing he said to the press, and that was it.
That was it.
He wouldn't say anything else.
But to Victor's point, just like kind of like to I think Victor like definitely got some wheels turning, some minds thinking. Like he definitely made people think who watched this debate. Like they're like, yeah, why should I vote Democratic or Republican right now when there's this third party that's clearly not as polarizing, clearly doesn't have all these problems within the party.
Right.
Like they see that and they're gonna say, hey, Victor made some really good points. Probably still won't vote for him because like again, it's two-party system. My vote will get wasted, but at least he got the thought out there. At least he was able to make some people think about
Plant
it.
the seed.
Plant the seed, which
Marketplace of ideas.
Maybe he should be campaigning a little more like Beto O'Rourke, as O'Rourke goes around the very little places and talks to the people so directly. Maybe that's what he needs to be doing, because O'Rourke seems very successful so
He's
far.
a very well-known politician.
Yeah, and I feel like Victor has the experience of a well-known politician without being known as a well-known politician. He ran in 2012 against Jeff Flake and lost. So
he has experience. I don't know if he has funding, though, is the problem.
Yeah.
Especially with the Libertarian Party. If funding is a big thing. Like, you need money to run a campaign. and I just don't think he has that kind of money.
Like, especially compared to like Kelly's massive,
Oh, I know,
massive
God.
campaign budget. What, like 56 million?
Masters getting the backing of like every single Republican.
He has a billionaire behind him.
Behind
Yeah,
him.
but
He's a
even
billionaire.
as much
Masters
money
has
as he
much
wants.
less money than Kelly.
You think
still.
so?
Yeah, like, cause it was like cut, and there's a whole bunch of.
This is open ends, but who won the debate? You gotta ask it. Who won the debate?
Masters.
Masters.
Mhm.
I think Masters, for what he was attempting to do, I think won the debate for that
Yes.
reason.
I'll agree.
Because he just was trying to get like independence. He was trying to get the Republican Party back. Like he succeeded. He succeeded.
He
in
had
that.
his goals walking into it, and
And he made his
checked
opponent look
them off
bad,
the list.
so
Yeah.
that's already.
I'll say if the debate includes the before, the during, and the after, maybe more goes to Victor, as Victor was the only one that stuck around after to talk to people. And I think that's huge. Even if it's not a part of the debate, being representative of yourself needs to be paramount to these people.
That's absolutely valid. I'm sure a lot of people didn't know anything about Victor coming to this debate, but like you saw him debate and you're like, actually, sometimes
Actually,
you agree on what he says, and so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. This was the Blaze General Senate Debate After Hours Reaction Podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys for the upcoming election.